Right, so welcome everyone to this roundtable. So that is on bordering higher education. And what we really want to do is discussing experiences and practices, as well as alternatives regarding access to higher education for refugees and migrants. And we'll have three speakers, and I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit later. But I'll first introduce myself, and I'll let Francesca introduce herself as well. So my name is Leonie Anselms de Vries, and I'm a reader in international politics at King's College London, and also the co-director of the King's Sanctuary Programme and the chair of the Migration Research Group. So Francesca, I'll let you introduce yourself as well, and then I'll talk a little bit about the session.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a lecturer in social justice at the School of Education at King's College, and very much looking forward to the session. And we really hope that it will be as interactive as possible.
Great, thank you, Francesca. So when Francesca approached me about this session, she'd seen the call for papers and said, couldn't we do something about this, because it's an issue that we both work on in various ways. So really that intersection between access to higher education for migrants and refugees and mental health. And soon we realized that actually we didn't really want to talk. We thought it would be much more interesting and productive to invite some people whose sort of experience and practices in this area we really admire and could really bring something. And also we didn't want to do something too formal. So the way we have set this up is as a more informal conversation. So what we'll do first, we'll have three questions broadly, and the first question is really enabling our panelists to introduce themselves. And then we have two other questions, and each time we ask them to respond to that in about 2 to 3 minutes. So it's not like a set presentation, but really trying to get a conversation going. And after those three questions, we'll open the floor also for questions from the audience, and hopefully we can continue the conversation that way. Right, so we have, as already been said, we've got Katie and Samuel and Fouad. So what we'll do, I'll ask the first question, and then I will also try and time it, because we want to make sure we get through all our questions, but I'll just put my hand up. I'm not going to cut you off or anything. The first question really is, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience or practical work in relation to that question around access to higher education and mental health. And the next question will give you more of a chance to elaborate on that. But this is really, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you've been up to. Shall I start with Katie on that? And then we'll go to Samuel and then to Fouad, just because that's how you are on my screen. Katie.
Hi, that works for me. I've also got my stopwatch here to make sure I don't ramble on, but I am Katie Barringer. I'm the head of education and progression at a charity called Refugee Education UK. We do a number of different things, but I think the things that are relevant really to the discussion today is we run an advice service. So it's email and WhatsApp, and that's for young people. So we work with young people from the ages of 14 through to 25, although that's a bit of a soft edge when it comes to access to university. And young people and practitioners contact us about how to get to university or to further education college, or indeed to school, but we're talking about university. So that's, I suppose, is one way that we field queries. We understand the issues that young refugees or asylum seekers are facing when they access education. We also administer a scholarship called the Westheimer Scholarship, which is, it's actually a suite of scholarships for young people who cannot access student finance because of their immigration status, and we provide ongoing pastoral support for those scholars. At the moment, there are 17 of them. And I suppose that allows us in more depth to understand, the ongoing issues, some of them sort of mental health issues that these students face when they're at university. I've got 30 more seconds, so I'm just going to say as well, the other thing to say is that we run a number of programs. We have a mentoring program, an educational wellbeing program, working with young people from all sorts of different immigration backgrounds. And some of them will, we've been working with them since very young, some of them then wish to go to university. So we also understand the issues from that perspective as well, I suppose. Yeah, I did ramble, but I think I rambled in the time. So back to you, Leonie.
You did perfectly. Thank you very much. Samuel, I'll go on to you then.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and it's nice to see your lovely faces. Can you hear me well? Is my audio all right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so hi, as my name says, I'm Samuel Remi Akimole. I'm a third year politics student at King's College London. And in regards to what I've done in relation to this topic, I was previously the president of KCL STAR, Student Action for Refugee Society, but also someone who's lived with this challenge of accessing higher education and has required the King's Sanctuary Scholarship to attend higher education. And so I've worked with organizations such as We Belong, who've kindly really supported me through this process, and other people on this call actually who've been quite pivotal in that experience. So yes, that's what I can say in regards to that. In relation to my wider understanding of this issue, with the volunteering work I've done with STAR and We Belong, and my own personal research into the experiences of young migrants who've had challenges accessing higher education, obviously that, as I say, young migrants, that I would really like to broaden that widely, because I've also engaged with young asylum seekers and refugees who share the same challenges, and just trying to understand it a lot larger to tell help them in telling their stories and so on and so forth. I think that's like 1:26, so I'm just going to end there, but thank you very much. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Samuel. And I'll move on to Fouad then.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fouad Trayek. I would like to thank all the organizers for inviting me for such a great opportunity to share a little bit of my experience. I'm a lecturer at the London School of Science and Technology, as well as I'm a volunteer researcher at King's College. I am a refugee myself. I've been recently relocated into UK, which is nearly 2 years. I have a PhD. Nowadays, I'm trying to help refugees to access higher education, and later I will share my struggling and problems trying to access higher education, because when I relocated into England, I have PhD. So the people were telling me, your PhD is not recognized, so you need to study another degree if you want to be in academia. So I was trying to get a sponsorship for that, but unfortunately our university rejected me because they said, you have a PhD, how can we sponsor you for a master? And then that's briefly about myself. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fouad. I'll pass on to Francesca, who will run the rest of the questions.
Yeah, so the way that we will do now, we'll ask two questions, one in two rounds, and then you have 2 minutes to just say briefly your thoughts, and really even you don't need to think much about that. So the first question that I'd like to ask you, and maybe we can go really on round, like first Kati and then Samuel and Fouad. Really, what are the key issues that you think are at stake when we talk about access to higher education and mental health for refugees?
Yes, gosh, you're gonna have to time me again because there is so much to say on this, and I think it's such a wide question because and sort of intersects, I suppose, so much. It seems to me that the key barrier to access to higher education from most people from a forced migration background will be finance. That many of them will not be eligible for student finance and will be classified at international fees rate. And that will have a huge impact on a young person's mental health, kind of obvious reasons. There's then all the other barriers that, I mean, Fouad sort of very briefly touched on this issue of sort of qualifications not matching up. So often having access to your previous qualifications is a huge barrier, which can be incredibly stressful. And then maybe you have studied previously, but that's not valid in this country, so you want to restudy, and then you're, even if you're a refugee, so therefore you should be eligible for student finance. If you've studied previously elsewhere, that makes you ineligible to do a qualification which is of an equivalent or lower level. So there are so many quite complex technical barriers that many times these young people have to sort of navigate and face by themselves. Brings huge stress and anxiety. But then I would also say that aside from these big sort of structural barriers, there are the things that sort of follow many people from a forced migration background that aren't specifically to do with access to HE, but absolutely will be brought with them as they try and access HE. And so these are things like sort of mental health and trauma, and I think not just trauma, but actually grief. So many of the people we work with are grieving and trying to process that. I think that I've worked with many young people who, for whom, exams are stressful anyway, of course they are, but for whom they're carrying the burden of taking exams for family members that didn't make it out, for siblings that have died, for example. And so it becomes, the desire to do well becomes absolutely overwhelming. And that obviously can cause, again, sort of huge levels of anxiety and stress and distress. I think then the sort of impact of belonging, and we work with many young people who have come by themselves to this country. They don't have a family around them. They're often looked after by social services, and they will have built themselves sort of communities of belonging. And moving to university is, for all young people, it's moving out of your community into a new community, but that can be far more stressful for a young person for whom that sense of belonging is so fractured and is so fought for. And I think when you sort of put in potential racism and just a real sense of being othered and different and people not understanding your experience, that in itself can bring huge anxiety, stress, mental health difficulties. I suspect that's my 2 minutes up.
Yeah, thank you, Katy. Yeah, you're doing great with the 2 minutes. Samuel.
I hope I'm able to keep on that streak with the time. This is a very interesting question. When it was placed via email initially, I didn't really know where to start. And I guess in my head I visualized it like a odd Venn diagram, all placed at different levels. And there was this reoccurring theme as I thought through this experience, and I guess I walked through it in my mind, and it was instability. The idea of just or this feeling of no balance, no like tether to hold on to. And this obviously arises from a lot of things that Katy, if that's how I pronounce, yeah, has said, or Katy, sorry, very sorry about that. And firstly, I'd like to start with the whole concept of financial instability. So I guess I feel weird like saying the obvious, but this is a very prominent issue for migrants and refugees and asylum seekers. Just financial instability is probably one of the most salient issues at the forefront of their mind before even their mental health. And this leads to a whole plethora of challenges that we're probably all aware of, that probably leads them to being vulnerable to be exploited for labor and so on and so forth. But this is something that definitely causes a huge issue when it comes to access to education and their mental health, because in this journey to pursue your ambitions, your aspirations, whatever you want to do, but also having to sort of take care of your family and just wanting some sort of stability for, especially as a young person. I'm going to be speaking a lot from a young person's perspective. There's a lot of things to balance there, and there's often quite enough resources or support to just make what the basic necessity, what the baseline you want to be a reality is to exist. And that lack of provision is probably like the fundamental, like is a huge problem. And moving on from that, I think the idea of a new country, a new system, and a new identity is something that really causes a sense of instability, because in the UK, as someone who moved there when I was 11. I didn't necessarily feel like my identity changed that much. But as the years went by, there were a lot of labels and so on and so forth ascribed onto me, and there were lots of challenges that I didn't know that I had, or were barriers that I even needed to face, that you're sort of like just hit with. And so it's the lack of understanding of the existing landscape and your place within it that really causes this instability as well. I'm going to end there because I feel like I've gone over time, but yeah.
Thank you. Fuad.
Thank you very much. It's, to be honest with you, it's very touching question for me because so many issues coming to my mind, but I will short it and start with something was, for me, it's completely shocked as an academic when I first arrived and they banned me from studying. And for me, it was, this is against the human rights law. I mean, every human in this life deserves education. So because I just arrived to this country, and in order to increase my chances to engage and integrate within the community fast, even though I could speak English, but I thought like I would need to improve my English more. So I start looking around until I secure a place for a TESOL course, which is for 6 months. And later on, when I noticed that I need a permission from the Home Office, they rejected. I tried by myself, I tried with my solicitor, I tried even with STAR, I think, some other organizations, I could not. And then when I decided to start myself improving my life, I start trying to get involved again with academia because myself, I'm a former assistant professor back in my country. So I start trying to get involved with academia here and in touch with higher education. So most of the advice I received was, you are not qualified in the UK. So if you're still interested with academia, you may need to do another master and PhD. This was serious. It was very stressful for me, especially for my PhD. I was the best student, I get an award, and then just to give up all that efforts and your time, your money, because I self-sponsored my PhD, it was very hard for me. Then I decided like surviving better than died. So I said, okay, I will start again from zero and I will go back to my study. I start applying until I received the master offer. I start looking for sponsorship or fund. And all the organization I contacted, they said, sorry, you are not eligible because you have higher degree and you have access to education before, so you have to give the chance for those who have not get the chance yet. So I don't know how to explain it, but can you imagine, like, you're not allowing me to improve my English, you're not allowing me to study, you're not allowing me to go back to my actual academic career, and you're not giving me any advice, okay, or any clear policy that how can I engage and get normal to my life. So that was, especially I'm a torture survivor. I mean, I have a mental health issues. So all these mental health issues make the things and life is even more difficult for me. And I'm sorry because the time is almost over. So when I managed to get over all these things, so thanks God now I secure myself a full-time job as a lecturer, and my PhD, the previous one, is acknowledged and qualified and so on. So now I'm trying to help those who having same issue as me. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Fuad. Yeah, it's interesting. There are different teams and things around instability and labeling and mental health, but also how they are connected to what Maya Goodfellow was talking about, the hostile environment and policies. So 2 minutes. Another question. One of the $1 million question to answer in 2 minutes is really, what can we done in terms of practice? What can we done to improve access for higher education and mental health for refugees? If you can really like pin down in 2 minutes some practical things that could be done.
Do you want me to go first? Gosh, so much. And I think they are responses to what I said and what the other speakers said. So finance probably is the biggie. Sanctuary scholarships, Article 26 scholarships, whatever they're called, are fantastic. But to be really frank, they have to be as wide open as they possibly can be, and they have to be really thought through, well administered, and you know, the people deciding who gives them really receiving training. And so that also sort of, so yeah, finance, generous scholarships that understand the sort of things that Fuad was saying as well, that understand, so actually I'm talking about scholarships, that's at one level. The other level is actually getting a place at the university in the first place. So widening participation teams, really understanding the sort of themes that we're talking about here. And it's so frustrating, you know, just a little anecdote, sort of supporting someone who was brilliant. And I have to say, finally got a place to study medicine at King's, they're brilliant. And supporting this young person and being told by another medical school, oh no, sorry. And, you know, this was also a torture survivor, an extraordinary person, fled conflict. No, they don't meet our widening participation criteria because we only work with people who are in this deprived borough, and you know, it's a very UK focused widening participation criteria, and it's so frustrating. But I would say to really enable that, I think training's absolutely crucial. And what I mean is universities are not always going to be able to say yes, I recognise that. But it's also the way you say no. And again, through our advice service, we often get people contacting us who've been given really curt, someone whose English maybe isn't amazing, and they've reached out to someone, and universities are quite impenetrable from the outside. You know, there's lots of different departments. It's quite hard to work out who you contact, and they've done their best and they've got really quite a curt response. And I understand it's probably a busy administrative person who's like, oh, headache, I don't know what on earth someone's talking about, because the immigration system is so complex. But those responses, those sort of quite, you know, brush off responses are really difficult for, you know, that young person who is probably the most extraordinary, resilient, sort of persevering young person. So yeah, what have I said? Finance, widening participation, training. And then I would also just say sort of stuff that young people say to us is really important is open days, for example, doing the very best you can to make it as welcoming as easy as it can be for students from forced migration backgrounds. So specific open days for young people from these backgrounds, peer mentors, role models, so being met by students who've had similar backgrounds and can, you know, inspire and reassure, I think is really crucial. Much more to say, but I will leave it to the other speakers.
Thank you, Katie. Samuel.
Thank you so much. Katie's response was very, very comprehensive. I really appreciate that. And I'm just gonna like probably elaborate on a few things in regards to the universities themselves. I definitely agree in regards to broadening the access or the scope of who can be provided a sanctuary scholarship, or Article 26 scholarship, or 23. The numbers get jumbled in my head sometimes, my bad. But in regards to that, there are some practical issues with those scholarship programs and how they're timed with accepting whichever university offer you're given and so on and so forth. And so those kind of issues, I don't feel like I need to spell it out even further, but yeah, it should be addressed, because at least in my situation, it was really a roll of the dice of, you know, which offer do I accept and also get the sanctuary scholarship from, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And, you know, I guess I was quite fortunate to even receive an offer in regards to a place at university. So, yeah. So there's a lack of consistency as well across universities and the sanctuary scholarships. And like there's just, all of that just creates a lot of confusion, especially for a young person trying to navigate this space, which also adds to the challenges in regards to mental health. Then I wanted to elaborate in regards to communication. So as someone who's applied for sanctuary scholarships, the communication of a lot of universities, and I say a lot, meaning everyone other than the King's actually, not to give King's too much of praise here, but I guess I'm a bit biased because I ended up attending King's, but yeah, like it was really, really poor. And when I say really, really poor, I mean really non-existent. So there really needs to be a step up there, especially in regards to, you know, when you do say no, if you do actually communicate the no that you're saying, maybe provide some other guidance of where they can access support or so on and so forth, or other things that would make them better eligible next year. And because yeah, if they're taking all this effort, I think it's best, it makes them worthy candidates, or whatever, how you ever want to see them. I don't think that's the best way to phrase it, but yeah, it's probably how the universities see it themselves. The last thing I would like to say is, in regards to all the practitioners that are engaging in the space, they need to understand the system. It's very confusing, even for someone within it, but you know, you should be able to tell actually some differences between people of different states, so you can signpost them properly. But I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Samuel. Fuad.
Yeah, I think according to my experience, just two main points I would like to hire. The first one is I believe like the Century department or whoever department dealing with application, they need more training and being more aware about the refugees' background. Because no matter who I am, I'm seeking education. So being a refugee and just relocated here, even if I have a PhD, I may have a reason that I'm applying for a master. So it's not the way that you just reply and say, well, you taking the chance of others. It's not about taking chance of others. I need to build my future. If not, show me how I can get back into my normal academic life, okay, without taking the chance of others. And the other thing also, I think as an academics who I have met few already, almost similar as my situation, it should be a scheme of a training for those who have higher education and they came to this country in order to get back to their life and to get into the higher education, because no such scheme exists in the UK. So there are so many PhD holders who are just working at the shops, who are just working as a cleaner, and so on. And if you look for any opportunity for them as a trainer, I mean, to be trained or something, there is nothing exists for them. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and thoughts. I can see we can, there are 15 more minutes, and we can take questions from the audience. I can see that there are already a few questions on Mentimeter.
Do you want to make a start with the questions, and I'll keep moderating them on the Mentimeter?
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Maybe I'll start with a question that I think it seems quite relevant, especially now for also like in relation to different responses in the Ukrainian crisis. There is a question for the whole panel. What are some of the inequalities between refugees, academics, and students, depending where they might come from, their financial circumstances in terms of entering university education and sponsorship? So yeah, if there are some differences in terms of these pathways for access to higher education. Who would like to take the question?
I can start. I'm sure the others would like to jump in. So the most sort of recent crises that we're all aware of would certainly be Afghanistan and the Ukraine. And the government has, through various routes, but essentially people coming through the three different government routes from Ukraine, and also through the Arab and all the other sort of formal schemes from Afghanistan. Both of those groups will be home students and are eligible for student finance. Anyone, so this isn't particularly students, but anyone coming through, for example, the Syrian resettlement scheme, the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, would also be eligible for student finance and would be classified as a home student. So those, I suppose you'd call them resettlement schemes, typically would come with without the financial. There would certainly be other barriers that we've discussed and many more, but they would come without those financial barriers. Pretty much anyone else is going to have those, those financial barriers. And I think what this plays into is the Nationality and Borders Bill. The government is very much wanting to have a two-tier immigration system. where some people coming through resettlement schemes have a very, very different experience to other people coming through what we would call irregular routes, asylum seekers that come over the channel and come to this country and claim asylum. So increasingly, I think there is a very much a two-tier experience, depending where in the world you're coming from and how the British government views you and views the crisis that you're fleeing from.
Thank you, Katie. Samuel and Fuad, is there anything that you would like to add in relation to this question, or we can open to other questions?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Okay, there is another question for the whole panel about, so how inform our higher education institutions around trauma-informed practices, and how can refugees be better supported by those institutions? Anyone who would like to reply? Maybe Samuel and Fuad, would you like to say something about services and trauma, and what really can be done more by institutions?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I was going to slightly touch on the previous question, which I think the variation that I really wanted to highlight was really about integration and access to support, and you know, embedding yourself into a new community. I think, you know, access to student finance and home fees is one thing, but I've not necessarily ever sought that as a sense of true access. Is not really representative of their experience that, you know, those who are migrants or refugees or asylum seekers truly experience, whether they're said to be by the government and what actually takes place. But moving on in regards to your question around trauma support, from what came to my mind straight away was in regards to how universities could potentially work with communities that these refugees are already embedded in, or asylum seeker, or these people just in general are embedded in, to provide that comprehensive support. Because when you I guess place yourself within that context, and you, I guess like myself, coming to King's, you're moving away from your home. You have to essentially operate your life to some degree again, and then move to a new environment to pursue your education to some degree. This is quite a specific scenario. I think let's place a slightly positive spin on it. Let's say I'm a young refugee based in London. I don't think I would be still as inclined to take up the support that King's provides in regards to mental health support, just because that's what I've seen and witnessed with at least those who have engaged the Student Action for Refugee Society. It's the inclination is not it's not as present, and so I really think partnerships or working through student bodies like the Student Action for Refugee Society to ensure that the support that these young people are receiving is like well holistic and comes not just from this like large institution, which is a big dominant body, but it's coming from the grassroots level. But I hope that made sense. I hope it's coherent. But yeah, that's what I have to say in regards to that and how that could be improved.
Could I jump in for like just 1 minute and say I absolutely agree with everything Samuel said. I think the other point that I would make is that even if the universities really, really get it, really want to do well, we've been working for the universities, for example, have taken a number of Afghan young people, and they just don't have the trauma-informed specialists, particularly speaking community languages, and have come to us to say, can you help? And it's been incredibly difficult to actually find people who have the specialism to do that. So I don't have any answers to that, but I think that is a real problem.
Yeah, Thank you, everyone. There is a question specifically for Samuel, but I think everyone can really pick up on that, really about Sanctuary Scholarship. Samuel, you said about communications related to Sanctuary Scholarship that need to be improved. Can you share some specific ideas about how to do this, how to improve Sanctuary Scholarship? And I think, yeah, Fuad, you can also add more on that, or anyone who would like to jump on it.
Okay. Yeah, I think the best way for me to address this question is probably just take you step by step through my experience. So, you know, as a young person who had challenges accessing higher education, you're quite likely to take a gap year because, you know, like scholarships don't just fall from the sky, and neither does, like, I don't know, the money for international fees. So I applied to the universities, 5 universities. I fortunately was accepted to all 5 of them. And, you know, great news, but it doesn't mean that I'm able to go. So I applied for the Sanctuary Scholarships, and, you know, I chose those 5 because I knew that they all had Sanctuary Scholarship programs, which is great. You know, it's great that universities have the support. Some of them maybe 2 spaces, some of them free. Oh, fantastic. The chances are very slim, but, you know, hopefully, but I then began my application. Some of the applications processes was really, really just bad. Like the forms just were not really great. Yeah, it sounds weird, but like I don't know how to say you made a bad form. That's all I can say. And then when I reached out to these universities for information about, you know, navigating and answering the questions that they've asked, and if I am actually eligible, because of, as I said, different universities have different criteria, and some of them are not really well described, you know, within their form, which is quite poor. They didn't really respond. Like 2 out of 4 of them didn't respond. 5 of them, sorry, 2 out of 5 of them did not respond at all. The remaining 2 did, and I think I just crossed one off the list because I didn't have hopes of going there. Now I applied, and then one of them didn't like. Well, I applied for all 4. Sorry, 2 of them didn't acknowledge receiving my application at all, although I followed up quite continuously. You know, and as you can tell, I have this desire to pursue, you know, my education. So I'm looking for every email on the site, and no one seems to want to respond to me. So I don't know, like, it's a bit upsetting because, you know, why am I getting blanked? But sure, cool. But one did, King's did, and another university, which I should not name because, you know, why expose people like that? And actually, this is the university I did want to go to, no offense, King's, because it's closer to home. Yeah, as soon as I told them I received a King's offer, and, you know, despite saying, oh, I really want to go here, it seems like you're considering my application, they didn't respond to me ever again. Like, and that for me was quite upsetting because, you know, I held this university in such high regards that, you know, King's, which is, I think, is a great university. I was like, yeah, I'll put them aside just for you. And yeah, they still said no, or just didn't respond despite my continuous follow-ups. And so when I say poor communication, that's my experience of it. I've been told different stories from other young people, but because of time, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Thank you, Samuel. Anyone would like to add something on that, on Sanctuary Scholarship? Otherwise, we can maybe take another question in these remaining 4 minutes. Just maybe 2 people. Right, there is there is another question. Did you find that there is additional support and resources available for refugee students after they are able to enroll onto a higher education course? So, you know, after they get access, you know, what's the situation there?
It's okay if I know I've been talking for a while now, so apologies you have to hear my voice this much. I definitely would say there's access to more support. There's slightly more signposting, especially once you're within the institution. I think, you know, with more access to support, should I say, there will probably be slightly more uptake. But the point I wanted to highlight was, just because you have access to more support doesn't mean you're more inclined to take, like, doesn't mean those support services are being used as much as they should be or they can be, or to the degree that these young people want them to be. And so essentially the point I'm trying to indicate here is, it's great that universities and larger institutions are trying to provide the support for these young refugees or asylum seekers, so on and so forth. But it means nothing if it's not done properly or in a way that allows them to actually take up these opportunities. Yeah, I think there's a point there, and I'm just going to leave it and pass on to anyone else in the panel.
Just a very, very practical point about financial support when people have enrolled at university. A lot of the sort of hardship funds are only for home fees students, so asylum seeking students are still not able to access them.
Fuad, would you like to come here in this remaining minutes and say something that you think would be important, you know, for when in higher education?
Yeah, I think it's just about refugees. They have, I think, personally, based on my experience, they have a little bit bigger chance compared to asylum seekers. Asylum seekers who does not have a status and who been waiting for the decision from Home Office. And some of them, it may take them years waiting for that decision. While if they want to apply for the censorship, they will not get the same chance as a refugee who get the status. So I think that also needs to be taken in account and increase the number of places for those who have not get the status yet, because it's also mentally killing them. Imagine someone who's like doing amazing and want to further his education or her education, and you lock him in a room for 2 or 3 years, and he's not allowed to go out, he's not allowed to study, and so on. So for asylum seekers, I think mentally is really, really hard for them.
Yeah, this is a very important point, yeah, about asylum seeking and all the legal process and instability. Yeah, I'm conscious of time. We have come to the end of the session, and yeah, I just thank you very much, everyone, for participating, for sharing your experiences, your thoughts, and yeah, your suggestions and everything. It's really, really very much appreciated.